The temperature, a bare 10 degrees above zero. The wind, a cutting 20 miles an hour. The date, almost any bleak day in January 1778. The place, Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. The event, famine, exhaustion, and disease. 11,000 soldiers of the American Revolutionary Army starving and freezing in winter quarters. Shivering sentinels keeping a wary eye on the well-fed British forces, safe and warm in captured Philadelphia, 20 miles to the southeast. On this bone-chilling morning, 2,000 of the ragtag colonials are without shoes, feet wrapped in rags. 1/3 to 1/2 of them are unfit for duty. And before this terrible winter is over, 3,000 of them are to die. On the windswept hills and frozen ridges, rude log huts, chinked with clay, floors of dirt, provide the only shelter. In all the bleak, lonely whiteness, the only color is the crimson of blood that stains the drifting snow. A revolutionary poet says this for them: bitter words and bitter memories of the war against King George as they left their bloody footprints on the snows of Valley Forge. Yes, the Revolutionary War could have ended here. Yet somehow, this winter of despair becomes the turning point of the revolution. From it comes defeat for the British, freedom for the American colonies, the birth of the United States of America. It happens because of the determination and courage of the gallant commander of those 11,000 starving men. What is he like? What gives him the ability to rise above defeat and disaster? Let's go back in time and find out about his preparation for destiny. The son of a well-to-do Virginia planter, he is born on February 22nd, 1732, on a low bluff just above picturesque Pope's Creek, where it enters the Potomac River in Westmoreland County. The original brick house is long gone, but on the approximate site is a memorial mansion representing a typical plantation house of the early 18th century. For 3 years on Pope's Creek Plantation, young George plays with his toys and pets, watches the colts frisking in the lush pastures, toddles along the shore of the shallow cove that partly borders the gardens and rich fields of tobacco and corn. Then George's father, Augustine, takes his family 50 miles up the Potomac River to one of his other properties, Little Hunting Creek Plantation, later to become George Washington's own famous mansion, Mount Vernon. It is believed, however, that at that time only a small portion of the current house was in existence. Here George rides his first horses over Virginia's tidewater lands, his reddish-brown hair streaming in the breeze. He watches busy barges moving along the broad highway of the Potomac, sees tobacco for England being loaded at the wharf, learns to swim and fish. But when he is not quite 7 years old, he moves again to another family property. Some historians believe that on this very site was beautiful Ferry Farm, now vanished with the years, overlooking the bustling village of Fredericksburg. On the family's little red ferry, George crosses the narrow Rappahannock River for private tutoring, or possibly schooling, by a local clergyman in Fredericksburg. At least these are some of the theories about his education. It is certain that he learns reading, writing, mathematics, composition, and perhaps a bit of Latin. About average for a young man of his age and station. But his real education and development comes from books and the active outdoors life of farm and plantation, riding, shooting, swimming, and fishing. Then his father dies, leaving the 11-year-old boy Ferry Farm in trust with his mother until he is 21. George spends much of the next several years visiting the plantations of his older half-brothers, Augustine and Lawrence. With Lawrence at Little Hunting Creek, he becomes an expert horseman and learns to fence. At Pope's Creek with Augustine, he helps supervise the field hands, learns about tobacco and stock raising, and sails on the Tranquil Creek and on the Potomac. One story has it that at Ferry Farm, when he is about 14, he finds something that deeply affects his future. In a storage shed, he spies an old tripod and compass that belonged to his father. Young George gets instruction from county surveyors and soon is doing his own surveying on family lands. Then Lord Fairfax allows 16-year-old George to be an assistant on a difficult trip to survey some of the British nobleman's 5 million unexplored acres beyond the craggy Blue Ridge Mountains into the lonely wooded hills of the valley of the Shenandoah. At age 17, George is public surveyor for Culpeper County, helping lay out and survey Belhaven, later to be known as Alexandria, Virginia. And still later, he takes surveying trips far beyond the tidewater into the wild Indian-haunted forests of the western wilderness. This experience as a woodsman opens his eyes to the wonders of the West and prepares him for his adventures in the French and Indian Wars. 1753, Williamsburg, Virginia. Governor Dinwiddie sends Washington, now a 21-year-old major in the militia, 500 miles through largely uncharted wilderness to warn the French to stop building forts south of Lake Erie, in Ohio country, claimed by the colony of Virginia. The French, of course, reject the order. In the dead of winter, partly on foot, Washington returns to Williamsburg, narrowly escaping death from Indians and drowning. Washington makes a reputation with his widely discussed report on French aims, Indian allies, and fortifications. From it, it is clear there will be war, bloodshed and burning on the border. A year later, after recruiting at his headquarters at Gadsby's Tavern in Alexandria, the seasoned six-footer, now a lieutenant colonel of the Virginia Regiment, leads a small force to protect the construction of a British fort on the Ohio. Winning a skirmish against the French and Indians, Washington and his troops fire some of the earliest shots of the French and Indian War. But later, Washington is driven back by the French to his rough log stockade called Fort Necessity. Flooded, short of ammunition, his small force decimated and outnumbered, Washington, who has fought gallantly against great odds, is forced to surrender and leave with honor. In 1755, when he is 23, Washington comes to Carlisle House in Alexandria, headquarters for British Major General Edward Braddock. And in this very room is invited to join Braddock in the disastrous campaign to force the French from the Ohio. Despite Washington's warnings, Braddock foolishly chooses to battle in lines in the open. The French and Indians, on the other hand, fight from the cover of the forest, wilderness style. Result, the confused English redcoats are routed and slaughtered. Brave Braddock has 5 horses shot from under him, falls fatally wounded. Ever at Braddock's side, attempting to rally the forces, Washington miraculously escapes injury, although 2 horses are shot from under him, and bullets riddle his hat and uniform. Back home, at only 24, he is promoted to colonel of the 1st Virginia Regiment, commander of all the colony's troops, defending a 400-mile bloody border. Short of soldiers and supplies, he becomes an experienced commander and frontier fighter, effective training for the Revolutionary War 2 decades ahead. Think of George Washington, and we invariably think of Mount Vernon, his elegant mansion on a tree-crowned bluff, overlooking the broad Potomac. In effect, he inherits the estate from Brother Lawrence, who dies when Washington is 20. At first, he rents it from Lawrence's widow, until 9 years later when he takes full title at her death. As we move today over the picturesque grounds and through the beautiful rooms of the house he loved so well, we must remember that we see it as it finally was when he died at century's end. But this is a convenient time to appreciate Mount Vernon, even though we do not follow chronologically the many individual additions and changes in a 47-year period. For example, one addition, the graceful high-column piazza, one of the more striking features, which runs the entire length of the mansion. Some lovely ladies play an important part in Mount Vernon. One is the attractive widow, Martha Dandridge Custis, whom George, at 27, marries. The others are the patriotic women of the Mount Vernon Ladies Association of the Union, a nonprofit organization which for more than 100 years has carefully restored and maintained the mansion as a national shrine open to the public. This is the map Washington draws of the 5 farms totaling 8,000 acres that eventually make up the Mount Vernon estate. From the office in the library, he directs the complex management of the plantation, posts accounts, and maintains his papers and books. On horseback each day, rain or shine, he rides out to supervise, inspect, and plan. A progressive farmer, he is concerned with crop rotation, ornamented shrubs, the condition of his orchards, the harvests of corn and wheat, horse breeding, the herrings that his fishermen bring from the Potomac. His grist mill, from which high-grade flour is shipped to England and the West Indies, is a profitable enterprise. Washington, who admires stately trees and all growing things, builds this handsome garden and greenhouse. The social and recreational life is a busy one, too. An outstanding horseman, he loves to ride to hounds. He enjoys playing cards and billiards, takes pleasure in music, dancing, and theatricals, often attending balls and plays in Williamsburg and Alexandria. Guests and hospitality are an important thing at Mount Vernon. A busy place is the kitchen in a separate building, where hams and suckling pigs are roasted over a spit in the huge fireplace. Food is brought to the pantry in the main house, and then to the family dining room. For large numbers of visitors, the banquet room is used. Guests are impressed with the lovely Palladian windows and handsome mirrors. 200 years have done little to dim the beauty of the West Parlor, one of the finest surviving examples of colonial Virginia interiors. Washington is an active churchman all his life, a vestryman at the Church of the Woods in nearby Alexandria, and at the Church of the Falls about 15 miles to the northwest. He helps direct the construction of Pohick Church, the parish church of Mount Vernon, and is a trustee for many years. He is also a trustee of Alexandria, a director of its bank, a justice of the peace, first master of the Alexandria Masonic Lodge, and one of the founders of the Friendship Fire Company, for which he buys the first fire engine and pumper. He is elected and re-elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses in Williamsburg, the legislature of the colony, the first time when he is 26. His understanding of government grows in pace with his reputation as a clear, dependable, courageous thinker. And all the while, as a respected and experienced veteran of French and Indian wars, and a colonel in the 1st Virginia Regiment, he maintains a leading place in the colony's military establishment. Washington's wide range of actions in military and civic affairs begin to find recognition beyond the borders of the colony of Virginia, leading him inevitably to the national destiny for which fate seemingly has prepared him so well. The problems that will flare into the American Revolution cast their shadows over Mount Vernon, where George Washington's pleasant, active life is about to be shattered. Fate will call on him to rise heroically above adversity, to to wring victory from disaster. The victory that will make possible a new nation. His initial training under fire in the French and Indian Wars and the grim heroism at Valley Forge, though separated by 2 decades, are linked by the chain of destiny. George Washington's crucial role in the Revolution is characterized by the solemn words of fiery patriot Thomas Paine. These are the times that try men's souls. Perhaps the die is cast for him in the shadow of the church in the woods in Alexandria one Sunday in 1774, when Washington announces to fellow Virginians that he is ready to withdraw his allegiance from George III and fight for the independence of the 13 colonies. Washington is just 43 when he is selected by the Second Continental Congress as the Commander-in-Chief of the military forces. As a frontier colonel, he realizes he knows little of the problems of high command. But what he lacks in experience, he makes up in determination and courage. He takes command of the untrained motley army in July 1775 at Cambridge, near the British-held city of Boston. A stern disciplinarian, Washington will not tolerate a rabble in arms, deals firmly with offenders, and brings some order out of chaos. As the Declaration of Independence is being approved by the Second Continental Congress, Washington begins 8.5 long years of badgering a slow and confused Congress for money, men, and material. While recruitment posters go up throughout the colonies, he wins the first round from the British by daringly fortifying the heights around Boston and forcing the enemy to evacuate. But his fortunes quickly turn. Almost trapped in New York by General Howe's vastly superior forces, Washington hastily retreats at the last minute. It is a dark period as the commander, pursued by the British, leads his ill-equipped army across New Jersey into Pennsylvania. The British believe Washington is just about finished. Then, with all odds against him, he courageously turns and strikes, leading 2,400 troops across the ice-choked Delaware River. On Christmas night, 1776, Washington catches the British mercenaries, the Hessians, napping at Trenton. The Hessian commander is killed. 1,000 prisoners and supplies fall to Washington. But without funds and enough food, ammunition, and troops, he cannot capitalize on his success. The revolution becomes a conflict of endurance. Who will hold out longest? The well-supplied, tough, experienced British, or the hungry, ill-clothed Continental forces? Washington is hounded throughout the Revolution by a question. How can he hold together his tottering, unpaid troops? That question pounds in Washington's mind in December 1777 as his 11,000 exhausted, starving, shivering troops march toward winter encampment. The British are safe, warm, and reasonably well-fed in captured Philadelphia. Washington, who has lost 2,000 men in recent battles, now must find winter quarters close enough to keep an eye on the enemy. Selected is windswept Valley Forge, 20 miles northwest of Philadelphia. Feet in rags, blood staining the snow, the unpaid, gaunt Continentals trudge wearily up Gulf Road. Sharing his troops' hardships, Washington pitches his tent on this very spot on a bitter cold December 19th, remaining here until Christmas Eve, directing the hungry, freezing army's work to cut trees and build almost 1,000 crude log huts chinked with twigs and clay. The starving soldiers drink melted ice, eat fire cakes of coarse flour as they shiver on the wooden bunks and dirt floors. The general officers find shelter in nearby farmhouses. The other officers have rude huts little better than their men. With most of his troops under cover, Washington moves his headquarters to a small stone farmhouse and turns his full administrative attention to the tremendous task of keeping the army alive and fed in the bitter cold. From this office and dining room, he sends a stream of letters to a haggling Congress, begging for supplies and replacements. In the adjoining room, he meets with his generals on the tactical problems of how to protect Valley Forge in case of British attack. General Knox wheels his artillery into place, ready to move it on a moment's notice to any of the forts being built. Fort Greene and Fort Muhlenberg, which control the route from Philadelphia. Fort Starr Redoubt, commanding the Schuylkill River. Fort Huntington, guarding the north. And Fort Washington, overlooking the valley of Chester County. Observation posts are set up in the high trees of Mount Joy to warn of possible British attack. As it turns out, there are no battles here unless it is the battle of the spirit for survival. As the bleak winter moves on, supplies fail to arrive. Valley Forge becomes an incredible saga of physical suffering and heroism. 2,000 men are without shoes on the frozen ridges and streams. From 1/4 to 1/2 of them are unfit for duty on almost any single day. The small, dreadfully overcrowded hospitals cannot begin to care for the diseased and dying. 3,000 soldiers find eternal rest under the snowy mantles at Valley Forge and in that general area of Pennsylvania. In February arrives Baron von Steuben, a tough Prussian drillmaster who strides the Grand Parade grounds 12 hours a day, slowly changing the ragged troops into an efficient fighting machine. And finally, spring arrives. The Schuylkill runs thick with shad, and at long last, the soldiers eat their fill. And in May 1778, news comes to Washington of the alliance with the French, which especially gladdens the heart of the Marquis de Lafayette, one of Washington's able generals. Rejoicing troops review smartly before their commander on the Grand Parade, ready to pursue the British. The enemy had waited in vain for the American army to starve and collapse. Instead, the Continentals march out of winter encampment a determined fighting force. The war itself could have ended here at Valley Forge, and with it, independence of the colonies. But Washington's courage and determination marked this turning point in the American Revolution. There are still bitter battles and extremely difficult times ahead. Washington is shocked and saddened by the treachery of one of his generals, Benedict Arnold, who plots with British Major Andre to betray the strategic West Point fortress to the enemy. In the face of adversities, Washington and his comrades in arms persevere. Eventual victory is assured in 1781, when French allies help Washington force a British surrender at Yorktown. Washington is deeply moved when he finally says farewell to his officers, and many weep openly. As he resigns his commission before the Continental Congress in Annapolis, he is still vigorous and lithe at age 50. Yet 8 years of terrible strain have left their mark. But he is happy at long last to come back to his beloved Mount Vernon as a gentleman farmer. The plantations are run down and desperately need close attention, but affairs of the new nation take up much of his time and thoughts. He views with dismay the chaotic political and financial conditions which threaten its very existence. He pens long letters to leaders everywhere urging an indissoluble union, and presses for an early constitutional convention at which he presides in 1787. Almost by his stature alone, he holds the convention together, forcing compromise of divergent views to achieve a strong government with power to tax. What follows is inevitable. Back from a morning ride over the plantation, he stands in the library at Mount Vernon to be advised formally that the electors have unanimously chosen him as first president of the United States. He is reluctant, but he sees that he cannot refuse a genuine call from the people. At his mother's Fredericksburg home, he receives her blessing before going to New York City, where he arrives at the Battery by barge, to be inaugurated on the balcony of Federal Hall as crowds cheer below. Attacking the very difficult problems of the new nation with painstaking thoroughness, his administrations over the next 8 years are marked with caution. Wiser than all his partisan advisors in realizing how to protect the young republic, he steers a careful course of neutrality in the war between England and France, despite the pressures of powerful proponents of both sides. He tries to avoid a second term, but the demand is too great. Thomas Jefferson comes to Mount Vernon to urge his acceptance. With memories of his own days as a surveyor, he presides at the laying of the cornerstone for the capital in the new federal city, a city soon to be named after him. He feels old and tired when he firmly refuses a third term and comes home to Mount Vernon for the sunset years of his life with his family. A stream of letters and visitors keep him in touch with public affairs. At night, he reviews the mass of public papers he has accumulated and answers voluminous correspondence. He inspects the farms and gives advice to the overseers, riding out almost every day, regardless of the weather. It is after he spends the morning working on some improvements for the Mansion House farm on a cold, windy day in December 1799 that he comes down with acute laryngitis. The next day, he sinks rapidly. With several doctors and the family at his bedside, the courageous old soldier says, "I die hard, but I'm not afraid to go." Less than 2 hours before midnight on December 14th, George Washington dies without pain or struggle. He is 67. The bell in the Presbyterian meeting house in Alexandria mournfully tolls continuously for 4 days. He is entombed in the simple family vault overlooking the Potomac until the instructions in his will for a new crypt can be carried out. But it is not until 1831 that surviving executors remove the bodies of General and Mrs. Washington to the stately tomb nearby, where they rest today. This soaring tower piercing the sky in the nation's capital is probably the best known of the many monuments honoring the memory of George Washington, marking the stature of a great man who played a leading role in the epoch-making events that shaped our young republic. In this same city stands the impressive George Washington Masonic National Memorial, housing many mementos of the War of Independence, reminding a grateful nation that this war might have been lost except for his steadfast leadership. A memorial chapel and bell tower at Valley Forge is a national shrine to the heroism of George Washington and his soldiers. This granite shaft stands at Washington's Virginia birthplace. From here he went, neither trained as a military tactician nor educated as a statesman, to do memorable things in the face of overwhelming odds. It is no wonder that a life such as this has resulted in myths, fables, and fantasies that have made him a superman. But he was instead a real man, a man of iron will, capable of anger and love, dedication and despair, disappointment and devotion. The mark of the man can be seen at Valley Forge. Despite seemingly insurmountable difficulties, he knew that somehow he must keep alive a starving army in the freezing, snowbound encampment to win a victory. The victory that led to the America of today. His courage, indeed, was the courage that made a nation.